Republican representatives join us live with reaction to the week's news. Jim Jordan of Ohio and Chip Roy of Texas. Gentlemen, good to have both of you with us.
Good to be with you.
See you, Shannon.
Okay, Congressman Jordan, I'll start with you.
Sure.
Carl Bernstein, in making that statement, I'm wondering if he is referring to what we're expecting from the Inspector General Horowitz or from the U.S. Attorney Durham. And he didn't seem to be saying it in a positive way, like, hey, we're going to actually get details and news about this deep state thing. It was sort of in quotes, deep state. Do you think that's where he's referring, where he's going to?
Well, I think you could make the argument that the Democrats try to get out in front of what Bill Barr and John Durham are going to have in their investigation. Remember what Bill Barr said the very first time he testified. He laid it out real clear. He said there was a failure of leadership at the upper echelon of the FBI. We certainly know that was the case when you think about Comey, McCabe, Baker, Strzok, Page. He said spying took place. He said there's a basis for his concern about the spying that happened.
Hey folks, welcome back. Dr. John is here. So what just happened, guys? The White House booked Fox News for damage control. Markets crashing, courts ruling against them, international chaos. Put Trump in the one safe space where the cameras are friendly and the questions are soft. Project Calm, show a man in command. Instead, on live television, in front of millions, he completely fell apart.
And then fourth, he used some key terms, scary terms. He used unauthorized surveillance and political surveillance. And he wants to get to the bottom of all that. So maybe this is that. I don't know. What I do find interesting is you got Democrats selling T-shirts. You got Hillary Clinton in your opening. Hillary Clinton lecturing us after what we know the Clinton Foundation engaged with for so many years, engaged in so many years. And then, of course, you got the Democrats saying because Rudy Giuliani talked to some Ukrainians, we're going to impeach the president. It's all kind of ridiculous when you really look at it.
Well, and in a couple of letters from leadership or top Democrats, including the Speaker and now the House Intel Chairman, who apparently Adam Schiff is going to be leading the impeachment investigation as we know it so far, in letters to their members who are going home for recess saying this. First, Chairman Schiff, the complaint lays out a credible and alarming set of allegations. The Speaker then saying, sadly, the facts revealed in the past week have warranted an impeachment inquiry. Congressman Roy, why would you disagree with that?
The producers reportedly couldn't cut away. What they broadcast wasn't damage control. It was a psychological collapse in high definition. The shift happened so fast it gave viewers whiplash. One moment, the anchor was lobbing a gentle question about the path forward for economic recovery. The next moment, the president's face contorted into something unrecognizable. The volume in the room spiked. The carefully crafted talking points about tremendous growth.
Well, Shannon, you know what? You and I first met. I was the first assistant attorney general of Texas, and that was after I'd served as an assistant United States attorney. And you know what I never did? I never went into a grand jury and presented hearsay as the basis for an indictment. And that's what we've got here. We've got a document containing nothing but hearsay. And we've got a Democratic conference, which is being led around by the nose by the left-wing radicals of the conference with a disdain for the president that's coloring their judgment. They want to overturn the 2016 election. And that's what we're seeing happening. But you know what? When I talk to people in Texas, they want to see people talking about getting their health care prices down. They want to see the $100 million of debt an hour we're racking up dealt with. They want to see the 1,500 to 2,000 people coming across our border every day dealt with. They don't want to see more of the swamp circus that we're seeing the Democrats continue on a daily basis. And so I think that's what's going on before our eyes.
Shannon, if I could just add something.
Sure.
Chip and I sit on the Oversight Committee. That committee probably deals with more whistleblower complaints than any committee in Congress. So when a complaint comes in to judges' credibility, you look at two things. You look at first, did they have firsthand knowledge? Mm-hmm. This individual didn't. He tells us that. Second, you look at their motivation. Did they have some kind of bias? We know this guy did. The Inspector General told us this guy had an indicia of arguable political bias. That is Washington speak for this guy hated the president. So this guy has got problems on both fronts, and yet somehow we're supposed to believe everything he says.
And beautiful trade deals evaporated into thin air, replaced by a guttural stream of consciousness tirade that seemed to bubble up from some deep, unfiltered reservoir of paranoia and rage. He started ranting about an infestation, not the political kind, not the metaphorical rats of the deep state that he usually invokes. He was talking about actual vermin, rodents in the walls, scurrying feet, and unseen threats closing in on him from every direction. He gestured wildly at the corners of the studio.
We got the transcript. We know the president did nothing wrong. That's what we have to focus on.
Okay, I want to ask you all about some reporting tonight as well. Sean Davis writing a piece over in the Federalist saying that it's essentially like the intake complaint form for somebody who was going to be a whistleblower within the intelligence community, it used to require that you had firsthand knowledge of the allegations you were making. At some point, that form was changed. Now, Sean Davis writes about this in the Federalist. In a tweet tonight, he was trying to get more information about when that may have happened. He tweets this: I talked to a DNI official and asked when these revisions were made and why. The official said the intelligence community would not comment on anything to do with the anti-Trump whistleblower. I never mentioned or asked about the anti-Trump whistleblower. Congressman Roy or Jordan, whoever wants to take this, I mean, that's raising some questions tonight about when it was altered, whether it's connected to this case at all, and why the change.
Well, look, I think this is an important question, right? And I think Sean has raised something that raises a red flag for me when you look at how the process is unfolding. And let's also look at the timing here in August, right? The Ukrainian government didn't know anything about the dollars that were being removed until a month after the phone call.
His voice cracking with a pitch that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. He spoke about people wanting him out, about the walls closing in, about a conspiracy to drag him from the Oval Office in disgrace. And then the physicality of the meltdown took over. There was a crash, the unmistakable, visceral sound of a heavy door being slammed with enough force to rattle the light fixtures.
The dollars were released to Ukraine before any of this investigation unfolded in the last few weeks. And then if you look at what Sean's saying here, saying, wait a second, suddenly the change here so that you don't have to have firsthand account in order to present this kind of a claim, that is raising serious questions about what's going on in the intelligence community.
Well,
it's troubling. I was just going to say, Shannon, it is troubling, but it really shouldn't surprise us. I always go back to this, but I think this is important. January 3rd, 2017, Chuck Schumer says to then President-elect Trump, if you mess with the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. Maybe this is one of those ways. I don't know, but it sure seems kind of interesting that it happened in the way that it did. And now we have the whistleblower who had no firsthand knowledge and had a bias against the president. The Inspector General told us that.
Yeah, well, now we know that the Inspector General for the intelligence community is supposed to be on the Hill next Friday behind closed doors. And I'm sure both sides have a lot of questions, and we'll get more information about exactly what happened.
The Fox anchor, a seasoned professional who has navigated countless contentious interviews, visibly recoiled. You could see the whites of their eyes widen as the president rose from his chair, not as a planned exit, but as a flight response. His composure, that fragile facade of strength that has defined his entire public persona for decades, simply shattered like a dropped mirror. He was no longer the commander-in-chief. He was a man in the grip of a complete psychological breakdown, and he was doing it on live television. Then came the walk-off. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't offer a handshake or a nod to the camera. He just turned and stormed toward the exit, a blur of motion and fury. The Secret Service agents, their faces masks of professional neutrality barely concealing the tension of the moment, immediately closed formation around him and whisked him away. The camera lingered on the empty chair. The anchor sat in stunned silence for a beat too long before fumbling to commercial break. And that image, that static shot of an abandoned chair on a Fox News set, went out to every corner of the globe. It was the portrait of a presidency in its final, gasping throes. It was the visual confirmation of what insiders have been whispering for weeks. The man is not okay, and he is actively looking for a way out. Before we peel back the layers of this catastrophic moment and the resignation chatter that is now deafening inside the Beltway, let's have a moment of radical honesty. You cannot trust the mainstream media narrative machine to give you the full scope of this story. The corporate overlords who sign the checks at the big networks have a vested interest in either sensationalizing this for ratings or downplaying it to protect access. They won't tell you about the quiet conversations happening in the cloakrooms. They won't show you the panic in the eyes of the donors. That's precisely why we created Pump Politics. We built this platform to bypass the spin, to ignore the corporate guardrails, and to bring you the raw, contextualized truth that the establishment is too scared to touch. If you want to stay ahead of the curve and understand what's really happening behind the scenes, as this presidency teeters on the brink, join our free newsletter. The link is sitting right there in the description. It takes 10 seconds to sign up, and we'll deliver the news that actually matters straight to your inbox every single morning. Join the community of people who are tired of being lied to. All right, let's get back to the implosion. The on-camera meltdown is the headline, but the subtext is where the real terror lies. And that subtext is being fed by a steady drip of leaks from the innermost sanctums of Mar-a-Lago and the West Wing. The people who are in the room with him, the aides and attorneys who have to look him in the eye and deliver the grim news of the day, are talking. And the word they keep coming back to is resignation, not just as a hypothetical floated by his enemies, but as an active, ongoing calculus being performed by the president himself. The whispers suggest that Donald Trump is seriously, and with increasing frequency, weighing the merits of simply walking away. He is looking for the emergency exit before the floor collapses entirely. According to those familiar with the conversation, Trump has drawn a very specific red line for himself, one that is tied not to principle or policy, but to raw political survival. The chatter indicates he has confided to his inner circle that if the upcoming midterm elections turn into a bloodbath, if the House of Representatives flips to Democratic control, and the gavel changes hands, he is prepared to cut his losses and vanish. If we lose the House, then I'm gone. That is the reported sentiment echoing off the gilded walls of his Florida resort. Let that sentence wash over you for a moment. That is not the bravado of a man ready to fight to the bitter end. That is the cold, self-preserving calculation of a man who sees the gallows being constructed and is frantically searching for a pardon pen. This is the language of panic. This is the vocabulary of an exit strategy. It is the kind of talk you hear from a president who has run the numbers, looked at the legal exposure, stared into the abyss of multiple impeachment inquiries, and concluded that the job is no longer a shield, but a bullseye. He is thinking about ways to escape the humiliation. He is thinking about ways to avoid the perp walk. He is thinking about how to spin a resignation as a victory rather than the most stunning surrender in modern political history. The fuel on this resignation fire is, without question, the gathering storm of impeachment. The Democrats on Capitol Hill are no longer just sharpening their knives. They are unsheathing them on the floor of the House. The drafting process for articles of impeachment is well underway. The legal teams are working through the night, building a case that spans multiple fronts. They are zeroing in on the unauthorized and reckless escalation of military conflict with Iran, a direct violation of the War Powers Act and the Constitution's separation of powers. They are building a separate track focused entirely on his open defiance of the federal judiciary, a charge that strikes at the very heart of the rule of law. And there are a dozen other potential counts waiting in the wings, from abuse of power to obstruction of the mechanisms of accountability. Trump understands the political geometry of this moment with a clarity that is often obscured by his bombast. He knows that if the Speaker's gavel is in Democratic hands, the power to impeach is absolute. He knows the House can vote to stain his legacy forever with the mark of impeachment. And while he may cling to the belief that the Senate firewall, the 34 votes needed to block conviction, will hold, he also knows that the trial itself is a fate worse than political death for a man like him. An impeachment trial is not a quiet, backroom deal. It is a televised, months-long public shaming. It is a daily recitation of his worst failures, his most corrupt dealings, and his most unhinged directives read aloud for the historical record. For a man whose entire ego is constructed on the fragile foundation of winning and dominance, the prospect of being the subject of that kind of national tribunal is unbearable. The calculation forming in his mind is brutally simple. Why sit through the trial and risk the conviction when I can just flip the table and walk out on my own terms? The prediction markets, those cold-blooded arbiters of probability that care nothing for partisan spin, are flashing a warning signal that cannot be ignored. Polymarket, the platform where real money is wagered on real-world outcomes, has the odds of a Trump resignation hovering at a staggering 45%. Read that number again. Let it sink into your bones. Nearly half of the smart money, the people who make a living by accurately forecasting political risk, are betting that this president will voluntarily vacate the premises. That is not a marginal number. That is a seismic reading on the political Richter scale. It tells you that this is not just late-night speculation or liberal wish casting. It is a financial reality being priced into the market. People are literally putting their savings on the line, betting that Donald Trump will quit. That is how serious this has become. The speculation has hardened into a tangible, tradable asset of doom. And we cannot view this meltdown in isolation. This is not a single bad day at the office. This is the crescendo of a week so catastrophically bad that it defies belief. Look at the wreckage strewn across the landscape. The Supreme Court, a body he believed he had bent to his will, delivered a stinging rebuke by rejecting his legally dubious National Guard deployment plan. Federal judges, wielding the power of contempt, are openly threatening to throw members of his administration in jail over the continued stonewalling of the Epstein document release. His own hand-picked Secretary of Defense, the man meant to project military might, suffered a complete and very public meltdown in a Pentagon briefing room. The Senate, in a rare bipartisan display of backbone, blocked his chaotic and unauthorized war plans for Iran. And in the most tragic consequence of that chaos, American troops were killed in the escalating tit-for-tat with Tehran. The economic picture is a smoking crater. The stock market didn't just correct, it nosedived, plunging over 1,000 points and vaporizing retirement accounts across the nation. His signature tariff policy, the cornerstone of his economic nationalism, was ruled illegal by the courts, a legal and political humiliation of the highest order. A coalition of 24 states filed a massive coordinated lawsuit against the federal government over his overreach. And the ultimate metric of political viability, the approval rating, has collapsed to a mere 33%. Only 1 in 3 Americans believes he is doing a good job. The rest of the country is either actively rooting for his downfall or has simply tuned out, exhausted by the relentless chaos. This is the context. This is the pressure cooker. And on this day, the lid blew off. The breakdown on Fox News was the human reaction to an untenable situation. It is the endgame. It is the moment where the presidency stops being about policy and starts being about survival. So, let's dissect the anatomy of this disintegration and the very real possibility that the 45th president may not finish his term. The context is a siege. For days, the walls have been inching closer. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong, and it has done so in spectacular, overlapping fashion. The judicial branch has become an immovable object, blocking his every unilateral move. The legislative branch, once a supplicant rubber stamp, has rediscovered its constitutional spine and is pushing back on matters of war and peace. The executive branch, his own cabinet, is a collection of individuals either in open mutiny or drowning in their own incompetence. American blood has been spilled, American wealth has been torched, and all of this has been building, layer upon layer, until the psychological burden became too heavy for one man to carry. He reached a breaking point, and it just so happened to occur while a camera was rolling. The resignation option is not something he's just reading about in the tabloids. It is almost certainly a topic of active conversation with his legal defense team. When you are facing down the barrel of multiple impeachment counts and a post-presidency that looks less like a golf vacation and more like a permanent fixture in a defendant's chair, the Nixon option begins to look remarkably appealing. Resignation is the ultimate off-ramp. It stops the impeachment train dead in its tracks. You cannot impeach a private citizen. More importantly, and this is the grimy, transactional truth that is likely driving the calculus, it opens the door for a pardon. If he steps aside, the new president, elevated by the line of succession, will hold the absolute power to sign a piece of paper that erases a vast swath of federal legal liability. The lawyers are undoubtedly mapping out this exact scenario. Step 1, resign. Step 2, secure pardon. Step 3, retreat to the fairways, untouchable. For a man facing a legal tsunami, this is the only lifeboat in the water. But there is a war raging within him, and this is what makes the moment so unpredictable and so dangerous. The ego is a formidable opponent to pragmatic self-preservation. The Trump brand, the entire mythology of the man, is built on the altar of never quit. He is the counterpuncher. He is the one who turns defeat into victory through sheer force of will and bluster. To resign would be to voluntarily affix his own signature to a document that brands him a quitter. It would be to join Richard Nixon in the most exclusive and dishonorable club in American history. That legacy would haunt him more than any prosecutor. He wants to stay in the arena, he wants to swing at the umpires, he wants to rage against the dying of the light from behind the resolute desk. This internal tug of war, the lawyer whispering escape versus the ego screaming fight, is likely the engine driving the erratic behavior. He is a man at war with himself, and we are watching the collateral damage of that war play out on live television. The hinge of history on this question is the midterm elections. They are the single most important variable in the equation. If the Republican Party manages to hold the House of Representatives, a feat that looks increasingly improbable given the weight of a 33% approval rating dragging down every candidate on the ballot, the gate remains locked. Impeachment is blocked. He survives to fight another day, battered and bruised, but still standing. But if the blue wave crashes over the Capitol and the Democrats seize the Speaker's gavel, the floodgates burst open. The subpoenas rain down. The hearing rooms fill with hostile witnesses. The articles of impeachment hit the floor. And that is the precise scenario that triggers the "if we lose, I'm gone" contingency. He is looking at the polling. He is seeing the erosion of support in the suburbs. And he is making a cold, clinical assessment about whether he wants to be a defendant or a retired elder statesman with a pardon in his safe. This is why figures like James Carville are no longer being dismissed as partisan hacks when they make these forecasts. Carville, the Reagan Cajun, has been reading the political tea leaves longer than most of the current White House staff has been alive. He possesses an almost supernatural instinct for the currents beneath the surface of American politics. And he has been saying loudly and consistently that Trump will not finish this term. Carville's prediction is specific. Trump will quit if the midterms turn sour. He will choose the easy way out rather than face the gavel of impeachment. Carville's voice carries weight because he is a strategist, not just a pundit. He understands the psychology of power and the fear of humiliation. When Carville says resignation is on the table, it's because the people who run campaigns and count votes are all whispering the same thing in private. Remember the strange episode of the resignation letter that made the rounds on Capitol Hill earlier in the year? It was a symbolic document, a piece of political performance art, but symbols are the currency of Washington. That letter, demanding the president step down, was a shot across the bow. It signaled that the word resignation had moved from the fringe of political discourse into the mainstream of congressional conversation. Trump's furious reaction to the letter, calling the signatories traitors and worse, only confirmed that it hit a raw nerve. The fact that such a document even existed suggests that the idea of a premature exit has been percolating for months. What was once a protest gesture now reads like a prophecy. The visual evidence of the Fox News rant is the final irrefutable piece of the puzzle. It is the proof that everyone needed, but no one wanted to see. A leader who is in command of his mental faculties, who is navigating a crisis with a steady hand and a clear mind, does not behave in that manner. He does not rant about vermin in the walls of a television studio. He does not slam doors and storm away from a friendly interviewer. That behavior is not a clever act of political theater designed to own the libs. It is symptomatic. It is the outward manifestation of a profound internal crisis. It suggests a psychological state that is no longer capable of managing the cognitive load of the most stressful job on the planet. The fact that he is doing these things in public suggests his mental state is not just deteriorating, it is in free fall. He is not coping with the stress. He is drowning in it. And if that psychological unraveling reaches its logical conclusion, a complete and total break from reality, then the resignation question becomes moot. At that point, the 25th Amendment whispers become shouts, and removal becomes a matter of constitutional mechanics rather than political choice. Let's step back and survey the massive implications of this moment. We need to understand what this means for the country and for the immediate future of the government. The first and most startling reality is that resignation is no longer a liberal fantasy or a late-night joke. It is a realistic probability based on the confluence of legal jeopardy, political isolation, and visible mental deterioration. A few months ago, such talk was dismissed as wishful thinking. Now, with the betting markets pricing it at nearly a coin flip and the president's own behavior providing daily confirmation of his instability, it is a scenario that must be taken seriously. It might actually happen. He might actually sign the papers and walk away to avoid the greater humiliation of removal. If that happens, the constitutional order clicks into place seamlessly. The vice president, or whoever is next in the line of succession, ascends to the Oval Office, and the very first question on the new president's desk will not be about foreign policy or the economy. It will be a memo from the White House counsel's office outlining the scope and legality of a presidential pardon for Donald J. Trump. This is the subtext of the entire drama. Resignation is not merely about escaping the political stain of impeachment. It is about unlocking the legal immunity of a pardon. It is the ultimate insurance policy. Trump is likely thinking, if I can get out and get a pardon, I can avoid the handcuffs and the mugshot. I can rewrite the ending of this story. The political math of the midterms is the trigger mechanism. If Republicans manage to hold the House, the immediate threat of impeachment recedes. He limps toward the end of his term, a wounded and diminished figure, but still in office. But if Republicans lose the House, and all current indicators suggest they are heading for a shellacking, impeachment becomes a virtual certainty. The Democrats will have the votes, and they will have the mandate. They will impeach him over the Iran war powers violation, over his defiance of the judiciary, and over the mountain of other scandals that have piled up. Faced with that certainty, resignation transforms from a distant option to an immediate escape hatch. If the House flips, the Trump presidency is effectively over, whether by his own hand or by the hand of Congress. We must also confront the deteriorating mental state. It is no longer a matter of private concern or whispered speculation. It is a public spectacle. The ranting, the paranoia, the inability to maintain composure under even friendly fire. These are the signs of a man who is not well. If this trajectory continues, and there is every reason to believe the pressure will only intensify, we may reach a point where he is simply incapable of functioning as president. The 25th Amendment exists for precisely this scenario, a president unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office. If he has a complete breakdown, if he becomes incapable of making rational decisions, resignation or removal becomes not just a political necessity, but a national security imperative. The Republican Party is also running its own calculations. The party apparatus is not a suicide cult. The donors, the strategists, and the elected officials who have to face voters in swing districts are looking at the 33% approval rating and feeling a cold chill run down their spines. They are already distancing themselves. They are already voting against his military adventurism. They are quietly preparing for a post-Trump future. If he resigns or is removed, the GOP will not mourn publicly for long. There will be a brief period of shock, followed by a frantic, unified rush to realign behind the new president and try to salvage their majorities. They will abandon him the moment it becomes politically advantageous to do so. The loyalty only flows one way, and then there is the legal aftermath. If he resigns and secures a pardon, what happens to the state-level investigations that are beyond the reach of a federal pardon? What happens to the civil lawsuits? Resignation might solve his immediate federal exposure, but it also strips him of the protective aura of the presidency. He becomes a private citizen, vulnerable to the full force of the legal system. He is likely betting that a federal pardon solves the vast majority of his problems, but it is a high-stakes gamble. The overarching conclusion is unavoidable. This presidency has collapsed. It is not a functioning government. It is a reality television show that has jumped the shark and is now just a loop of the main character screaming at the camera. The breakdown on Fox News was the moment the subtext became text. He has lost the courts. He has lost the Congress. He is losing his party. And most devastatingly, he appears to be losing his grip on reality. The presidency is over in every way that matters. The only remaining questions are the manner of the exit and the identity of the person who will turn out the lights. What comes next is a period of intense, almost unbearable pressure. The Democrats will keep the impeachment drumbeat loud and relentless. The media will cover Resignation Watch with the same fervor they cover a Category 5 hurricane approaching the coast. Every public appearance will be scrutinized for signs of further collapse. The betting odds will fluctuate, but the trend line is clear. That 45% number will likely rise as the crises deepen and the midterms draw closer. It could hit 55%. It could hit 65%. The smart money will continue to bet on the end. At some point, a decision will be forced. The midterms will either provide a temporary reprieve or they will deliver the final, crushing blow. If the red wall holds, he buys time. He survives the immediate threat. But if the blue wave sweeps the House, the clock starts ticking loudly. He will have a choice: face the gavel of impeachment and the humiliation of a Senate trial, or preempt the entire process with a dramatic primetime address from the Oval Office. Given his obsession with narrative control, he will almost certainly choose the latter. He will want to frame his departure as a selfless act, a sacrifice to save the nation from the witch hunt rather than a surrender. This is the destination that a week of absolute catastrophe has delivered us to. It began with the Supreme Court rejecting his power grab, It saw federal judges threaten him with jail. It saw his defense secretary implode. It saw American troops die. It saw the market crash and his trade policy get shredded. It saw a nation of states rise up in legal opposition. And it ends with a man alone on a television set, ranting about vermin and fleeing the scene. It ends with a man surrounded by lawyers in a gilded resort, quietly asking how much a pardon costs. It ends with the word resignation hanging in the air like smoke from a fire that cannot be extinguished. This is the endgame. This is the moment where the improbable becomes the inevitable. This is the sound of a presidency fracturing into 1,000 pieces for all the world to witness. And the only question left is not whether it's over, but who gets to write the final line of this chaotic, unprecedented chapter of American history.